Sponsors who are here this morning. We have Tim O'Mahony from the Origin Group. Tim, you're very welcome. And John McGrath, from Gouldings. John, you're very welcome this morning. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to our sponsors for this morning's event, the Evening Echo. The team at the Evening Echo have been supporting the Marketing Institute activities for some years, and in particular have come on board to help the promotion of the calendar of events as media sponsor. Despite that ongoing support, they also picked this event to support as a direct sponsor. So the team from the Evening Echo are represented here this morning by Ray Lockheed, Diarmuid O'Donovan, Maurice Gubbins, Lisa Collin, Valerie Dean, Sean O'Keefe and Kieran Deneen. Thank you all for joining us, and sincere thanks for your ongoing support. Could we give them a round of applause, please? Just to fill you in on the timeline for this morning, Alf will begin his talk shortly, which will last for approximately 35 to 40 minutes. We will have time for a few questions after his talk. We are delighted to bring quality presenters to address you, and we encourage you to take the benefits that are offered. So please ask our expert as you have the opportunity. After the Q&A, I'll have a small bit of housework to do, in particular promoting our marketing ball and our next calendar event. And we should have you out of here around 9 a.m. Some of you may wish to stay with us for a little while and to meet a few people in the room, meet our speaker and our team, or take the opportunity to network, mingle and enjoy. If you are on Twitter this morning, we're using hashtag MIISouth. That's our hashtag, so at least it keeps us all together. You didn't come here this morning to hear me talking at length, so without further ado, I'd like to give you an introduction to our speaker. Come on, you're okay, Alf, whatever you like, yeah. I use the introduction liberally, of course. This man needs absolutely no introduction around these parts. A Cork man, born and bred, married with 5 children in Brooklodge and Glanmire. He went to school in Sullivan's Quay Christian Brothers and attended secondary school at Deer Park. From there, Alf went on to UCC in 1979 and graduated with an honours commerce degree in 1983, having studied accountancy, economics and marketing. That just about covers it all, Alf. He joined the Cork office of PricewaterhouseCoopers and qualified as a chartered accountant in 1987. From PwC, he joined the brewing giant Beamish & Crawford plc in 1988 as financial controller and became finance director 2 years later and managing director in 1992 at the age of 30. He has spent over 20 years in the Irish and international drinks industry, working on local and global brands. He has been a long-time supporter of the Marketing Institute and indeed became a fellow of the Institute in the year 2000. Following the acquisition of Beamish & Crawford for $12 billion in 2008 by a global conglomerate formed by Carlsberg and Heineken, he has been working with many organisations across a broad range of private and public sectors, working with CEOs and boards to help drive their organisation and brands forward. He is a highly experienced business leader and very well qualified as a Fellow of the Marketing Institute, a Chartered Accountant, and indeed also has a Master's in Executive Leadership from the University of Ulster and Boston. Would you please give a warm welcome to Alf Smiddy.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Unfortunately, I have to leave that lovely breakfast after me. So maybe the Clarion might take it away and keep it hot for afterwards. Chairman of the Marketing Institute, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, First of all, I'd like to thank you for the very kind invitation to speak to you here this morning, and to see so many people out so bright and early. I'm conscious that we have a fairly diverse audience. We have people who own their own businesses. We have marketing people who work in various companies. We have people from marketing agencies, including PR companies. And of course, we have the main sponsors and large representation from the ECHO. I even see a few accountants here. Most marketeers spend their lives trying to run a mile from accountants, but this function this morning has forced maybe a little bit of collaboration between the marketeers and the accountants. I have, as Vincent said, a long association with the Marketing Institute that goes back over 20 years, and worked closely with the chairpersons and organising committees of the Marketing Institute for all of those years, in hosting events actually in the Beamish Brewery in South Main Street, but also in sponsoring lots of events over the years, the main ones being the big marketing ball that I think is on this week, am I right? With brands like Beamish Stout and Miller Genuine Draft, and more recently actually creating an association with the Kilkenny Group as well. So I'd like to take the opportunity as I start here this morning to congratulate the Institute on all of your great work, and for the fantastic marketing network that you have created over many years in Cork. And I feel and think it's going from strength to strength, and I would encourage people actually to get involved and support the Marketing Institute. And as Vincent said, I was very privileged to become a fellow of the Marketing Institute in the year 2000, I suppose largely on the back of maybe a lot of contribution to the Institute over many years. So what am I doing here today? I guess sometime before Christmas, I was sitting at home one evening, and I had a call from your highly esteemed chairman inviting me to a forthcoming function and to speak at the Marketing Institute. And back then it didn't seem any bother. It was like almost 6 months away or 4 months away, so I obviously couldn't decline. He made contact a few days later and said that he needed to get my theme, or what I was going to talk about, into the Institute calendar for 2012. And at the time I happened to be reading a great book called Good Boss, Bad Boss, How to Be the Best and Learn from the Worst. And it's written by Professor Robert Sutton from Stanford University. I'd encourage people to buy it. And so I said to Vincent, look, use that as a title and I'll work it out afterwards as to what I'll actually talk about. So Good Boss, Bad Boss is the title of this conference, I suppose, or talk this morning, with marketing leadership in there. And I suppose most of you sitting in this room have a boss, and most of you probably believe that you could do your boss's job better than he or she can do it. That's kind of natural, I think. Yeah? Many of you in this room are also bosses, and guess what? Most of the people reporting into you probably believe that they can do the job better than you can do as well. That's fairly natural in from my experience. Now, if you happen to be sitting next to your boss here this morning, I probably have created a little bit of an uncomfortable environment in saying that. But there has been a lot of research carried out on leadership over many years, and actually the Institute of Directors in the UK, in the early, I think in about 2002, carried out extensive research on leadership, and specifically concluded that the top 4 characteristics that leaders should possess are: number 1 by a long shot. Number 1 is inspiration. Number 2 was strategic thinking. Number 3 was being forward-looking, and number 4 was honesty. I hope we don't have any politicians in the room in the room here this morning. So think about the leaders in your organisation and ask yourself, how do they match up with what's expected from the boss or from the leader? 55% of managers identified inspiration as the most important leadership characteristic, but the research went on to say that actually only 11% of managers experience that in reality. So there's a huge gap between what managers expect of their leaders and what leaders or bosses are delivering for their organisation. And throughout my career, Vincent asked me to talk about my own career in a little bit of detail this morning. Throughout my career, that spanned, I suppose, over 20 years in the international, in the local and international beverage business, beer business. I had 10 bosses from almost as many different countries. That's like a boss every 2 years. Thankfully, only one of them was an accountant, and that was very early on. And apart from him, as I said, they were all based outside of the country. That was probably good as well. During my time, I think I was exposed to the very best and the very worst in leadership. But when I look back, I would have to say that the people that I learned from most, in terms of the bosses that I had, would be the marketing professionals, and I say that in all sincerity. A few people actually stand out as great bosses, and I think what they all had in common is that they had a huge drive, and they were custodians of absolutely everything that was positive about the group that I worked with, ultimately the Scottish and Newcastle group, but prior to that, the Foster's Brewing Group. They were real leaders of the organisation, people who had huge pride in the company, the team, the brands, the customers, and a confidence that nothing couldn't be achieved once everybody worked together in the spirit of partnership, in camaraderie and fun. They were not command and control people. I think the days of command and control type bosses or leadership is out the door and is well past us. But people who worked with everybody and worked hard to bring the best out of people. I suppose most of all, and this is why I say the marketing professions I felt were the best bosses and leaders that I have. They were market and brand driven. They were totally customer focused and worked hard every day and every week to mobilize the entire organization behind the brands in the organization. They just really believed in the brands and in the customers, and knew that at the end of the day, the wages and the salaries of everybody working in the organisation were actually paid by customers and paid by selling brands to customers, because that's actually the only income that most businesses have. One of them was the sales and marketing professional from the USA, and ended up as the chief marketing officer of the Foster's Brewing Group, who ended up based in Melbourne in Australia. And it's nice to see some of my former Beamish colleagues here this morning. They'll know that gentleman very well. The second was a former marketing director of Unilever, who went on to become the marketing director of my parent company, and is today the president of Heineken in America, looking after the entire business of Heineken in North and South America, based in New York. His name is John Nicholson. And the third person was the marketing director of Procter & Gamble in France, before he became marketing director at Scottish and Newcastle. So all high-level marketing experts and well qualified. As I mentioned, one of them was former marketing director of Procter & Gamble, which would probably be one of the largest consumer goods companies in the world. And the CEO of Procter & Gamble has often refers to, in his talks to his leadership team, to the two moments of truth. And the first moment is when consumers pick up a Procter & Gamble brand in the store, and the second moment is when they use a Procter & Gamble brand at home, and that is a fact. Procter & Gamble brands are used over 4 billion times every day worldwide. It's a huge global consumer goods company. I suspect that has actually changed, because I believe today that the first moment of truth is when people turn on the website and delve into the brands of the company. And the second moment of truth is probably when you pick up the brand, and the third moment of truth is when you actually use the brand. In my opinion, based on many years of experience, marketing people can be truly great business leaders, and are often the best place in actual fact to create an inspiring vision for the organisation and to re-energise organisations. And yet at the same time, having been exposed to marketing departments and marketing people all my life, I actually think that marketeers have often get a bad name and need to shake off some of the negative perceptions that they have, I suppose, developed over the years. You'll all probably identify with comments like, they live in the ivory tower of the organisation and are completely out of touch. I'm sure you as marketing professionals might have heard that. They're great people. They're great at spending company money to enhance their CVs and careers. Just tell them what your budget is and they will spend it. Comments like, and I'm sure you've heard this one as well, we spend a lot of money on marketing. We know that about 50% of it works and 50% is wasted. The problem is we can't identify which half works and which half doesn't. And comments like, they're meant to be the real experts in communication, but they never talk to us, they never listen, they never engage in people around, with people around them in parts of the organisation or indeed with the customers. There are some of the negatives and maybe some of the baggage that has come with the marketing, I suppose, function over the years, and I've heard those comments being played out time and again. As an example, only last week I met with one of the main buyers of one of the multiple grocers in Cork actually, but based in Dublin. And this person made the point that often companies spend huge amount of money on new packaging, on new designs, on new pack sizes, and they come in here in a fait accompli way and ask us to stock them on our shelves. And guess what? 5 times out of 10, they're not listed, and there's a whole lot of marketing money that just wasted. And what this person said is, it's a pity the marketing people would not engage with us, first of all, to look at, to talk to us, to engage with us, and tell them what we want, and then they could bring a lot of that into their marketing thinking. So back to my career, I suppose, which started up all those years ago. As Vincent said, I qualified as a chartered accountant with PwC in 1987, and later I joined Beamish and Crawford later that year, early 1988, joined Beamish and Crawford as financial controller in a very difficult time for the business and in a very difficult time for the country. As you all know, the 80s was a really tough time in Ireland. Ford's and Dunlop's closed in 1984. Some people here are probably too young to remember the 80s, but a few reminders here. Murphy's Brewery, which would have been a main competitor of ours back then, went into receivership in 1983-84. Beamish and Crawford was to follow in the late 80s as a result of a global acquisition at that time. It was just taken over in 1987-88 by the Foster's Brewing Group, which was based in Australia. And as a result of that global acquisition, it lost the Carlsberg franchise, which accounted for about 50% of its entire turnover and profitability at that time. And it was purely as a result of a global acquisition of the company. So the company was acquired by the Foster's Brewing Group in 1988, and in that year, or within 6 months of that year, it lost half of its business, which could obviously have been catastrophic for the business, and would be catastrophic for many businesses if you lost half of your volume, half of your sales. Just going back to the economy at that time, the Economist published a survey of the Republic of Ireland in January 1988. It described Ireland as a poor, struggling economy. Unemployment was at 18.5%. The top rate of tax was at 65%, and capital gains tax was at 60%. So well ahead of clearly what the rates are today. Cork was described in that article, in an article in The Economist, as a rundown city and economically devastated during the late 70s and 80s, with thousands of people having to immigrate. So I went over to Beamish and Crawford to fill a temporary position for 3 weeks and spent over 20 years there. It was a very attractive place to work. It was fast-moving consumer goods, being beer. It was at the time when computers were being introduced in manufacturing in Ireland. It had a large manufacturing facility at South Main Street. It had thousands of publican customers and off-premise, off-license customers. It had lots of beer, and it had a great history. And of course, for me at 26 years of age, the thought of working in a brewery with all of that beer around me was just actually magical at the time. The beer business, though, it's become very tough, but it was for me, and I think it is a great business. It is literally driven by thirst and refreshment. It's driven by conviviality and camaraderie. And I suppose it's driven most of all by great marketing. I could talk an awful lot about Beamish and Crawford and the immediate job that had to be done when I joined the business back in 1988, the job being to restructure and to reconfigure the business on the back of the fact that it had just lost half of its volume. But that's not for today. I was recruited, I suppose, by the finance director and by the HR director, and as events transpired, I became their boss within 4 years. As Vincent said, I was made finance director at the age of 28, and I was managing director at the very young age of 30. It seems like a lifetime ago, but that was the reality. The business had become paralyzed as a result of this big global acquisition, and it was very much the perfect storm in the business, with a lot of restructuring and a lot of re-engineering of the business having to take place. So with a huge amount of effort by many people, including some people sitting over there on my right, the business was entirely restructured, and the company continued very, very successfully for another 20 years and was ultimately sold along with its parent company for 12 billion to a conglomerate formed by Carlsberg and Heineken. And as they say, the rest is history. I really feel privileged to have worked in Beamish & Crawford. It's a company that was steeped in history and had some amazing brands. During my time in the business, and I mentioned to you that I worked for 3 marketing people based in other markets, but reported directly into them. And as a result of that, you know, I had the opportunity to immerse myself in marketing and brands, both in Ireland and abroad, regularly meeting marketing departments, meeting PR companies, meeting media buying companies. And the 4 marketing P's that all of you will understand, apart from maybe the few accountants here, of product, price, promotion and place, became the key focus for all the brands. Brand differentiation is critical, is crucial. You know, one of my lines was, be different or be damned. If you're the same as everybody else, you will never get noticed. So whatever brand you have, you've got to be different. And creating that differentiation, I think, is largely all about what you do with your product, your price, your promotion, and where you're marketing your brand. The vision for Beamish & Crawford became all about, I suppose, fragmenting the market. It was a David and Goliath type marketing positioning that we took, because you had one large player in the Irish market that you'll all know, the Diageo, or the Guinness company. So you had that organisation with a huge share of the marketplace, and our whole positioning and strategy became all about fragmenting the market, creating this David and Goliath effort, and beating them up at every opportunity, and I suppose eating into their profit sanctuaries and taking profit from them. Beamish Stout in 1988, for instance, it's probably a bit too early to talk about beer, but Beamish Stout back in 1988 was actually a very small brand. It was sold in a couple of streets off South Main Street, largely Barrack Street and maybe South Main Street and North Main Street. It was described actually at the time as the Cinderella brand of the company. It really never got out, you know, it was sold a little bit around the perimeter of the brewery. But actually in the 10 and 20 years that followed, it became a crucial part of the success of Beamish & Crawford. It was a brand, I suppose, at the time, you know, back in 1990, 91, 92, it was researched, it was relaunched, it was rejuvenated, it was repositioned, it was reinvented, it was reformulated, it was repackaged, and it was rebranded, and enjoyed phenomenal growth in the Irish market and in international markets on the back of some amazing campaigns. Some of you might remember some of them, you know, the strap lines of a great pint at a great price, or consistency in a world gone mad, or the most recent one, which I think is being used by Heineken today, who now own the brand, the strap line, it's all about the stout. And those marketing campaigns actually resonated very, very well with the consumer and with the trade. The greatest joy of all for me, I suppose, working in the beer business, was bringing the Beamish brand to Dublin and to the backyard of Guinness, where it enjoyed exponential share growth year after year and achieved a weighted distribution in Dublin of about 80%. The brand was, as I said, also launched in several international markets, including London, Paris, the States, and so many others. So we took a big part of Cork's history abroad at the time, and very, very successful. And it was literally the engine of the company for 20 years as the brand went from strength to strength. Over the years, there were also many other brands. There was brands like Miller Genuine Draft, Again, fantastic brand, lots of marketing activity and marketing campaigns around it, and the brand, ultimately became the #1 bottle beer in the Irish market, and was also launched in the off-trade in can and in draft. I suppose for me, what I saw from very early on is, and lots of stuff is written on this, is that the customer is truly the king. And the companies and the people that I work for, especially the sales and marketing people, got that big time. The customer is king, and the products that you sell to the customer, have to be right to satisfy the customer. There's a lot of talk about, the customer, but if you don't have the customer inside, your organization is probably going nowhere. So I'm just going to talk maybe about 3 of the big lessons that I've learned, in some respects it's probably preaching to the converted. But the very first one is, no matter what business you're in, I strongly feel that putting your brand center stage and working every day to inspire, to delight, and to even surprise your customers is just critical to the success of your organization. In my opinion, boards of companies and senior teams in companies, not just the marketing department, so boards and senior people in companies should spend at least 80% of their time thinking about their brands and thinking about their brand strategies and their customers, and not the stuff that doesn't impact on the customers. Do that outside the board meetings or in other forum, but the board meetings should all be about winning new customers, about connecting more with the customers, and I suppose ultimately selling more product to the customers. Bill Gates, I often quote this, he said that Microsoft is often only 2 years away from failure. So he clearly understands the competitive reality of the new age. Today, a company has to be able to reinvent its strategy, reinvent its brands every year, every second year. In my opinion, the vision of all successful organizations is an awful lot to do with brands and marketing, and corporate brand visions can truly, I suppose, inspire organizations, can energize organizations, and can align and mobilize everyone behind goals. I don't think people get energized or become inspired about financial targets as part of your vision. They become energized and inspired about what you decide to do with your brands going forward. The 3 biggest brands in the world, I guess you'll all know them. The 3 biggest brands in the world are Apple, Microsoft, and Coca-Cola. And what they all have in common is that they put their brands center stage and strive at every opportunity to create a trusting relationship with customers and consumers. Trust is the key word here. If you're not trusted, you don't get a look in my opinion. So don't ever make false claims. This whole thing of WOM, you probably heard it, word of mouth, WAM, word of mouth marketing, has become huge for every brand, and especially with digital and social media taking off so much over the last couple of years. Don't underestimate the importance of it. You see it all the time now with Facebook, with Twitter, with LinkedIn, and so on and so forth. And if you and your company are not engaged with that, I think you're not doing a service to your organization or to your brands. With brands and the engagement with customers and consumers, you really never get a chance. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. Consumers and customers are very, very smart. I'm sure you've all heard the line, fool me once, fool on me, fool me twice, fool on you. And it's very, very true. If you try to con the customer or the consumer, you might get away with it once, but you're most unlikely to get away with it a second time. In Ireland, we've had, I suppose, a huge level of what I call brand destruction taking place before our eyes over the last 2, maybe 3 years at this stage. If you look at the banking sector, for instance, look at Anglo-Irish Bank. The brand has been a huge brand that has been allowed for all sorts of reasons, and I won't go into those, but has been allowed to wither on the vine, and has recently been renamed. If you were to ask me what it has been renamed as, I just couldn't tell you, but lots of letters in it anyway. Take another big brand that you'll all know, a brand called Foss. Again, had to be renamed over the last 12 months. The brand fell on its sword because it broke that magical word of trust between it and its customers and consumers. And so that brand has been renamed and broken up. It's very, very clear that some big Irish brands are in serious difficulty. including household brand names like many of the other banks, some property brands, and dare I say it, if you go move it into the political field, a brand like Fianna Fáil. Again, it lost the trust of its customer or its consumer, and when you do that, sometimes you can spiral down and completely out of your control. And that's why, I suppose, in many respects, for marketing professionals like yourself, the current environment, I think, can become a field day for marketeers, because the challenge will be to try and reinvent those brands going forward. I suspect, actually, on the brands that I've just mentioned, and there are many others, a huge amount of research is being carried out on them at the moment. If the accountants, I suppose, who control those organisations now have allowed the purse strings to be released for those brands to be researched. And in relation to marketing campaigns, I suppose it's important to remember as well that consumers get hit with thousands of advertising messages every day. And organisations, I think, going forward need to be much more focused at creating breakthrough and creating cut through. It's not acceptable anymore that 50% of what you spend is wasted. If that is the case, it just can't be. So you've got to create focus. You've got to create breakthrough with your campaigns. With all the advertising clutter that's out there and all the images that we see consistently every minute, every 10 minutes of the day, I think the mantra going forward will have to be largely about fewer but bigger campaigns. So doing fewer things in your organizations, but doing them bigger and creating a strong resonance with customers and with consumers ultimately. A good example might be what you might call Brand Ireland. You have the likes of Board Fawlty doing all sorts of stuff all over the world for Ireland over many years. But in terms of fewer but bigger, if you take the big event of last year, the visit of the Queen and the visit of President Obama, it was largely magical, those visits, and I think what it has done for Brand Ireland has been huge. These events were beamed all over the world. The images of Cork, I suppose, and the Old English Market, we saw them everywhere. And so that's a good example of maybe doing bigger things and maybe dropping off the stuff that have low impact, because at the end of the day, I don't think those things achieve too much. And this week we've had the visit of the Vice President of China, Mr. Xi Jinping, I think is his name. He spent 3 days here, again a big event for Brand Ireland, and beamed all over the world, and particularly all over Asia over the last while, which should stand the Irish Inc. brand in good stead. So that's the first point, is putting your brand center stage. And no matter whether you're in a fast-moving consumer good organisation, whether you're in a services company, whatever, I think the key is, and certainly my experience would tell me, that you will enjoy success if you put your brand and your customer center stage. The second thing is innovation. I think innovation should be the heartbeat of every organisation. That means having a pipeline of new ideas and products and services. Steve Jobs said that innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. Innovation has no limits. The only limit, he says, is your imagination. And that is so true. In every business, you're either moving forwards or you're going backwards. You cannot stand still. And the best way to ensure that you are moving forward is through innovation and having a pipeline of activity in terms of new products and new services on new ways of working even. Apple, for instance, is a very good example of it. It's worth about 60 billion, maybe 70 billion at this stage, and credited for pioneering wonderful products like the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, and has created truly amazing brands. And I think it clearly demonstrates how a company can survive and thrive after a major crisis. Back in the 80s, Apple almost folded, but I think they realized that the way to get out of this crisis is through innovation and by putting their brand center stage, and I think they've achieved all of that. Innovation is critical for every business. Everything should be considered. The 4 Ps again: the product, the price, how you promote, and where you're promoting. And in terms of product, that means possibly new brands or new line extensions, new services. In terms of pricing, pricing has become so important in most markets, but the Irish market, and value has become so important everywhere you go right now. It's it's value, it's a new pricing formula and mechanisms that companies are introducing and putting in front of the consumers. If you feel that the old way where you had one price for your product is the way for you, I would almost guarantee you it's not going to work going forward. Consumers expect an awful lot more. And so new ways of promoting our product and marketing. I touched on digital marketing, hugely important, and so many other forms of new marketing that need to be considered. And I suppose lastly, for businesses that may be struggling at the moment, I think business people need to get more into the whole area of strategic alliances and partnerships with suppliers, maybe with customers, and maybe even with competitors, which might have been heresy previously. But in all of that, what you're trying to do is innovate and create a freshness and looking to re-energize your organization. A gentleman called Gary Hamel, he's probably one of the world-renowned business strategists and business writers. He said, and he wrote a wonderful book called Leading the Revolution. And he said that leaders and managers should be free to dream, to create, to explore, to invent, to pioneer, to imagine. And said, if these words do not describe what you do in your organization, you are already irrelevant. And your organization is probably becoming so as well. So I'm not saying that he's totally right there, but those words, reflect, what I'm talking about here, about putting your brand center stage and about creating a pipeline of new activity and innovation in your business. And when I say innovation and when I say putting your brand center stage, I'm not talking about the marketing person in your organization doing that, and that's kind of over there in that department. This is about creating a deeply embedded corporate-wide capability around marketing, creating a funnel of ideas, options and fallback positions to deal with the challenges and opportunities ahead. Marketing, whilst in many of the larger businesses, the marketing department might take responsibility for the brands and for innovation. Actually, it's the whole team and the whole organization that really needs to embrace what I'm seeing here this morning. And if you take Ireland and take Cork specifically, I believe that actually Cork is very well placed to be the centre of excellence as a marketing and innovation hub in Ireland. And organisations like the Rubicon Centre, the National Software Centre down in Mahon, UCC and CIT, I think have a major role to play in shaping the agenda and making it happen in Cork and creating this hub of marketing and innovation in Cork. I think we just need a bit of joined up thinking to reposition and relaunch all of this and seize the moment as these organisations, perhaps in conjunction with the Marketing Institute here, can play a really strong force in creating this vision and agenda. The third point, so putting your brand center stage, innovation, the third point is getting the people and HR dimension right. I think it's very, very important in today's climate for companies to choose their marketing leaders very, very well, bearing in mind that if you can't inspire yourself, it's most unlikely that you're not going to be able to inspire people around you. I do believe that the future is going to be about brands. I see huge opportunity for marketing graduates and people with strong marketing skills, as they are the people who actually, in my opinion, will lead their companies forward in the years ahead. There is a disruptive force at the moment, and I mentioned it in market. It's the digital force, it's the social media force, and a lot of companies, I think, that are embracing that are actually doing quite well at the moment and finding ways of managing themselves out of the crisis. I see it. I'm involved. I'm chairman of a company called Granite Online Marketing, and they spend their whole time working on search engine optimization, on digital marketing for lots of companies. It was a startup company, about 2-3 years ago, and would now have 200 clients, small, medium, large clients, but working actively with marketing departments and people in the whole area of digital marketing and search engine optimization. And actually for companies, this should not be tokenistic. You have to put real resource into this to make it happen. So to conclude, the downturn commenced here in mid-2008, and since then I think it has been a field day, I suppose, for the finance people actually, You know, a lot of businesses, by their very nature, have because of the crisis, have struggled, and finance people and corporate recovery people have come to the top, trying to deal with the financials and get the financials back in order. But I guess 3 years on at this stage, one would imagine that if the financials haven't been sorted at this stage, then probably a bigger solution is required for many of these companies, a more radical solution. You know, if you're still hacking into the, I suppose, if you're still looking to strip out cost in your business, you're probably hacking into flesh at this stage, and some more radical solution is probably needed. The last 3 years for many businesses have been all about battening down the hatches, stripping out costs, but in my opinion, that can only continue for so long. I have seen across Ireland over the last year, over the last two years, I've seen marketing departments being completely wiped out. I've seen marketing expenditure in many big and small companies being completely obliterated because companies had to get into survival mode, and survival became the mantra. And discretionary spend, including marketing spend, was just taken away. But being in survival mode, it may buy your business some time, but it will not give your company competitive advantage or edge, nor will it create a sustainable future for your business. I firmly believe, as I said, that the future will be about marketing, will be about brands, and I think senior people, senior managers in organization need to grasp this. Boards and management teams will need to put their brands center stage, and will need to put innovation center stage in your organizations. Over the last 3 years, and Vincent touched on this, I've got involved in all sorts of companies and businesses, trying to help them, you know, find the opportunity, trying to help them to expand and to grow, and I think with much success. When I get involved in business today, the last thing actually that I talk about is the financials or the financial performance. The first thing I talk about is the brand or the brands, be they products or services, how they are positioned, who are the customers, and what are the customers saying, what are the marketing insights, are they winning, are the brands winning, what are the customer issues, what is the company image. Again, if companies have battened down the hatches over the last 2 or 3 years, the company image has probably suffered somewhat. It's about the engagement with employees and how the employees relate to the brands. Are they strong advocates of the brands? If you haven't your employees being strong advocates of the brands, it's very, very hard to expect consumers and customers out there to be flying the flag. And I suppose generally insights and feedback from consumers. And I suppose over the last 3 years, ladies and gentlemen, those conversations have taken a long, long time and continue. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Super. There was a lot in that, and I hope you found it very relevant. Brand and organization restructuring, re-engineering, rejuvenating, reformulating, and re-energizing. Anybody else get that bit? I certainly got it. Another little gem there I thought was, if you're still working on stripping out costs, you're possibly hacking into the flesh at this stage. Interesting little dimension on the situation. I think I've heard lots and lots of comments over the last few years about the market and how it is, but isn't it great for somebody to actually analyse it and give you a little dimension on it as opposed to just repeating it? And I think some great value in that, Alf, so absolutely super. Thomas, if you have a microphone, maybe we could give people a chance to have a few questions and answers if anybody would like to kick off. Paul, you might do the honours with the mic for us, would you? Would you mind? Thanks a million.
Don't be shy.
So anybody like to kick off and maybe test or challenge Alf a little bit further?
There's one down there.
Okay, Michael.
The question of cost came up there towards the end.
Yeah.
For more than 25 years, Beamish has sold at a substantial discount against Guinness and Murphy.
Yeah.
I wonder, how was it possible for a small brewery to maintain the cost advantage to let you do that and be profitable?
I suppose the answer is, all those years ago, back in 1988, we had to look at the options. and there was never really an opportunity to to have the marketing budgets of Guinness and the main player, who were spending above the line, below the line, across the line, and spending multi-millions. So what we said we do, I think, and I think it was a great decision at the time, what we decided to do is pass the benefit on to the consumer. So we didn't have the big marketing budgets, or didn't put the big marketing budgets in terms of what you see with the main competitor into these campaigns. We put it into price, which is another tool, and we saw that as an investment. So every keg or every barrel you sold, effectively there was a price advantage passed on to the consumer. But it became part of our way of working. It was part of what I call the variable cost business model. If you sold, you won. If you sold, you made money. If you didn't, again, as I said, a lot of marketing money is wasted. So if we had put the money into a big heavyweight marketing campaign, I think we knew at the time that much of that would have been wasted. So it was a strategy largely directed to attacking the underbelly of Diageo. We knew from all our research that people drank stout because largely it was cheaper than lager, and that is a fact. People might talk about how they love their stouts and how they love their Guinness, but stout actually is probably 20 or 30 cent cheaper than premium lager. Yeah, so that's the first thing. And stout at the time accounted probably for about 60% of the total, maybe 70% of the total beer market in Ireland. So we had one of those stouts. It was hidden away, and it was largely how do we bring it out? It was like launching a new product, and we put all our efforts behind price and continued that right through for 20 years with year-on-year growth. I don't know, does that answer the question? But I suppose the marketing proposition largely became all about price and value. And if you look at today and what businesses are doing today, it's exactly that. It's not so much selling something cheaper, it's selling value and trying to create resonance between that and what the consumer really needs, and is looking for.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Morning all. Thanks very much, Alf. That was a really interesting and a great kickstart for the week ahead.
Great. You feel like a beer, obviously.
I just stuck to the coffee. But I suppose just one of my fondest memories as a kid was going down to the Carlsberg concerts. There was huge concerts that were promoted by Carlsberg and sponsored by Carlsberg. I remember going to the Lee Fields, seeing Christa Berg, and like he was obviously huge at the time. Yeah. But so that was way back.
Great.
But I suppose I'd be quite concerned at the moment about the drinks companies and the support that they provide in sponsorship of arts and I suppose the Jameson Film Festival and those kind of activities, that would be pulled. Do you think that would have a huge impact on festivals and organisations? Well,
I think it certainly is an issue, and certainly, I suppose for me, I've been involved in the drinks industry for 20 years, and 20 years ago it was an issue. And every year afterwards it was an issue. It's always topical. Like for instance, if you take France, you're not allowed to advertise alcohol on television in France. So you've many restrictions in many countries. In terms of the advertising and promotion of alcohol, and some of that is largely well placed. But if you take the UK and Ireland, you don't have those restrictions, but you have self-regulatory codes, which have become very prominent and very important. There is a lot of pressure from government and from I suppose the department, various government departments, to restrict the promotional activity of drinks companies. Is that likely to become more concerted? I suppose it is, but I do think the drinks companies are responding well to that. I think it would be a pity, actually a huge pity, if drinks companies were not allowed to support community activity, sponsorship of music events and sporting events. I think it's all become almost too politically correct. I think when drinks companies out there right now, when they advertise their brands, they've introduced this strapline. You'll see it in every campaign. I think it's drink sensibly or drink responsibly. You can take it too far and you'll have the consequences. I suspect in Ireland we continue to head in that direction, but I don't see legislation coming into place where where drinks companies will be prevented from getting involved in activities like that. It's been on the agenda, as I say, for literally 20 years, you know. Yeah.
Tim?
Hi, good morning. My name is Tim O'Riordan. I'm a construction engineer who's kind of trying to morph into something different.
Yeah.
I've a few business ideas which are outside of engineering, more IT based.
Great.
And my question would be for you. I've kind of talked to a number of people, and I have an idea that that I think could go global. And I suppose the question is, when do you go global? Do you start in the Irish marketplace, and do you see how that's going to grow? And my concern would be that I suppose someone's going to copy your idea and then maybe go global. So how do you what's your advice in relation to who do you talk to? How do you I suppose my experiences in engineering. I've been involved in some very high level projects in the city here. I see myself changing. I'm a thinker. I'm looking at different technologies, have access to those. And I suppose what your advice would be for someone who has, say, maybe that great idea, and how they should, say, within the Cork community, review and develop that idea without kind of giving that idea away. What your thoughts are,
Well, I suppose it's very difficult without knowing the product, but the first thing I would say is that is at a stage where you have licensed it, where have you got trademarks and patent rights on it? So if you haven't, you probably should look at that. If you feel that it has the potential that you're talking about, you should look at that very carefully. I think what I would do then is circle into Enterprise Ireland at a very high level. Again, if this is something that has real potential, I think you need to connect with the right people in Enterprise Ireland, at senior level and work it along with them. I think Enterprise Ireland actually have done really, really good work in supporting new business, and particularly in the IT sector. They have this high performance startup sector at the moment, and I think there's a gentleman in Enterprise Ireland, his name is Martin Corkery, who's based here in Cork, that looks after that. So it would be worth, I think, having a discreet, confidential conversation with them in the first instance. Maybe you've done that. I just don't. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Dermot. Yeah. Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Alf. Just one question, going back to your time with Beamish and relating it to now. If your marketing budget was available to you, with the marketing budget you had available then, how much of it would you have put into social media and digital marketing, which wasn't available at that time, and what do you think you would have done with that?
Well, I guess it's a very difficult question, but I would say that any company with a brand or service that you're trying to selling to customers or consumers out there, I think you have to cover the basics. And for me, before you get into the bigger television campaigns or the radio campaigns or even the press campaigns, you've got to sort out the basics. And the basics for me right now, social media and digital media would actually almost come first. If you have a marketing budget, I think you need to cover that ground very well. And when you have that covered, I think you probably need to move on to the other more classical forms of marketing, which is television, radio, and so on and so forth. Yeah, press.
Sponsorship, Al.
Sponsorship, yeah. I mean, I could list. It's a bit like the Beamish brand and all those reformulate. I mean, there are so many platforms to market your brand. But I would see the website. It is a fact. I'm involved in the Kilkenny group, and they've expanded very nicely over the last couple of years. But we know from our own research that when people are buying wedding gifts or whatever, they get onto the site. Many of them get onto the website before they visit the store. They don't necessarily buy in the store. Sorry, they don't necessarily buy on the website. Many of them do, but they look at the range on the website, and then they will visit the store, and they'll have their mind actually made up before they go into the store. So, in my opinion, for any company or any service, whether it be construction or beer or accounting or auctioneering or whatever. I mean, you've got to get the basic rights, and the basics certainly include that.
Is that okay? Would be all right wrapping it up there? Thank you very much, Alf.
That's great. Thank you.
Great delivery. Thank you very much. So I just have a small bit of homework to do first. These are the reasons we think these events are very worthwhile. We'd encourage you to register at mii.ie and stay in the loop with regard to who we've got coming up. Generally, we've got great feedback this year and every year from the people that have attended our events. So we'd look to promote them, and we think they're of great value. This is your team that works on our council in this area. Obviously, this kind of a machine doesn't work without huge help from some good people. So Jenny, of course, I've mentioned, Norina, Audrey Burke-McCarthy, Colette Quinn, Mandy Young, Ashley Hennessy, Brendan Collin, Mark Hagerty, Brendan Hyland, Carla Flanagan and Paul O'Connell. Could you give them a round of applause for all the help they give us? Thanks very much. We have various sponsors throughout our calendar of events. My own two companies help with the design and the branding of the organisation and the calendar of events in this area. That's B2B Print and B2B Signs. The Clarion sponsor us with our guest accommodation. Any guests coming to present to us, they're willing to look after them, give us great hospitality here. Of course, our media partner, besides being a direct sponsor this morning, help us out throughout the year with our promotion. We really appreciate the exposure you give us, guys. Thank you. WSI have been helping us position a little bit with our digital marketing. Thanks to the guys there. Cavs, of course, Thomas is here this morning, but Mark and Max, always behind the scenes, champions of what we do, never a mutter, always happens seamlessly, make us look good. Thanks a million, Thomas. And One Vision, we have Ian this morning, he's videoing this. We've got some nice feedback from the videos. Some people love to soak back into the topics and maybe spread it to some of their teams. So the videos will be uploaded on the YouTube channel as well. So thank you, Ian, for your support with that. Just to move on to what's next up, the marketing ball. If you have not been to the marketing ball, you are missing out. So this year we're gone with a magical moonlight ball theme, sponsored by Corona Light, March 24th in Silver Springs Hotel. There are tickets available at mii.ie. It's a fabulous event, a bit of glitz and glamour, a bit of promotion, a bit of networking. I can highly recommend it. Thank you for coming out and joining us. I have one final thank you for Alf Smiddy there. Alf, if you'd mind, I'll get you back on your feet for a minute again. Can Kenny support us with the ball? So we always use
Great brand.
But it's a Graham Nuttall set just to mark your occasion to presenting to us. So thank you very, very much. So that's it. If you want to meet a few people in the room, we'd be very delighted to have you. Follow us with our green policy. You might return the badges on your way out if that's okay. And thank you very much for joining us.